This episode is part one of a special two-part podcast series with Darrell Beauchamp. Darrell is the executive director of the Western Museum of Art in Kerrville, Texas. In this episode, we take up the history of the Western Museum of Art, Darrell's professional background, begin an exploration of the Cowboy Artists who make this one of the top Western art museums in the United States. I know you'll enjoy this episode.
The Texas Hill Country is one of the most beautiful places on earth. In this podcast, recent Hill Country resident Tom Fox visits with the people and organizations that make this one of the most unique areas of Texas. Join Tom as he explores the people, places, and their activities of the Texas Hill Country.
The Hill Country Podcast. And today I have Darrell Beauchamp. Darrell is with the Western Museum of Art here in Kerrville, and he's graciously agreed to sit down and visit with me to tell me all things about the museum. So Darrell, first of all, welcome, and thank you so much for taking the time to visit with me.
Hey, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Darrell, could you tell, I did a little research on you beforehand. I was very surprised to see that you went to college at East Texas, what used to be East Texas State, now Texas State Commerce.
Occasionally they'll call me and want to replace my diploma with, Texas A&M Commerce. And
right.
I didn't go to Texas A&M Commerce. I went to East Texas State University.
Right.
And got a bachelor's degree, went away for a while, moved back to the area when my father-in-law had a heart attack, and went to work for the university, and somebody said, why don't you work on a master's degree? And I said, well, hell, I didn't even want a bachelor's degree, but I did, and they paid for it, and I ended up with a master's degree and kept working for the university, and somebody said, why don't you work on your doctorate? And I said, I don't want a doctorate. I didn't even want a bachelor's or a master's. I ended up, getting my doctorate in education. So all three university degrees are from East Texas State University. But it was a great school, three completely different fields, three areas that were unique for me, good learning experiences, and I'm proud to be a graduate of East Texas State University. Now it's been 40 years, but still nonetheless.
Could you tell us a little bit about your professional background after the university life? Yeah,
I was an accidental museum director. I'm the executive director of the Museum of Western Art here in Kerrville, Texas. This is my fifth and final museum. When I leave this one, I'm not going to ever go into anything else. This is my retirement gig, if you will. But I was an accidental museum director. I was a librarian, of all things, at Navarro College in Corsicana, Texas.
Wow.
When I left East Texas State, I went to the University of Central Arkansas and worked in media programming for a long time in libraries, and was hired as the dean and the director of the library system there at Navarro College. And it was growing. Today it's 4 campuses and huge and all that, but back then it was just right on the verge of breaking out. And I was hired to be the library director. And I'm sitting in my desk at my office one time when this old man walks in my office, and I knew his name is Charles Pierce Jr., Chuck as we called him around town. And I knew he had some ability, some wealth, but had no clue, And he walks in and he says, I've got something I want to give to the library. And I thought, oh great, here's another old guy with the Day Kennedy Was Killed magazines, they collect things. And he got out his envelope, and I'll never forget it. It had been raining outside. He comes in with his umbrella and his manila envelope and his little briefcase, and we got it all settled down. He said, I've got something I want to give to the library. And I said, okay, great. And he pulls out an Abraham Lincoln letter. Pulls out a handwritten letter by Abraham Lincoln, President of the United States. Follows that with a Robert E. Lee letter. He follows that with a George Meade letter, one of the generals, Ulysses Grant. He has 17 letters in this thing. He and his wife have been collecting letters from battlefields and soldiers and politicians from the Civil War after watching the Civil War. Ken Burns' Civil War series became real popular. And so he says, I'd like to give these to the college. What do you think? And I said, well, wow, we've got an archives, but and we can protect them. I had no doubt we could, but it's just kind of a unique gift. And he said, I have two conditions. I'd like to keep on buying Civil War letters, documents, and I want researchers to be able to lay their hands on these when they come to the archives. He said, I think Civil War researchers will love to see these letters. You need to be able to put them, in their hands. He said, I don't think there's anything quite like having a child hold an Abraham Lincoln letter for Abraham Lincoln to come alive, in history to come alive. So I went to the college president, we talked about it, and basically I got the assignment of, babysitting Mr. Pierce as he grew this little collection. And we thought, it'll grow a little bit, right? 17 years later, there were 19,700 documents, manuscripts, letters, battlefield flags, ephemera, memorabilia from the Civil War. Chuck had made it a lifelong quest to just build one of the most outstanding Civil War document collections in the history, in the nation. And it is today the largest Civil War collection west of the Mississippi River. There are some in Virginia that are bigger, there are bigger collections. But 19,000 documents, letters and manuscripts from every battle, from both sides. He didn't collect just Union or just the South. He collected a balanced approach, to things. I'll never forget him getting a Battle of Chickamauga or something, a letter from the general about his, our troops are positioned appropriately, and all this wonderful thing. And he had a battle letter from a sergeant who said, we're hunkered down behind fences and we're doing, such and such. And had a letter from a private that said the old men are going to get us all killed. It was a pretty balanced look at the Civil War. And so we collected Civil War documents, materials, added them to the archives of the college there, and was beginning to develop a really great reputation as a place to come do Civil War research. About 3 years into this, he came to me and he says, you know about mine and Peg's Western art collection? And I said, yeah. I'd been over their home many, many times. And they had a fabulous Western art collection, Cowboy Artists of America members, famous Western artists. He said, we'd like to do the same thing with the Western art collection. We'd like to give it to the college, have it out, have people be able to see it. So we added Western art to our stuff. And like I say, 14 years later, when this whole thing ended with the two of us, he had over 400 famous Western art paintings, wonderful Western art paintings. And today it's one of the larger collections. It rivals ours here at the Museum of Western Art. It's a fabulous collection of Western art. He had those two passions, Civil War, Western art. 4 or 5 years into this whole process, once we've acquired the Civil War, once we've acquired the Western art, it became evident that the archives and the library there on campus was no place to store. I had $1 million Howard Turpinning painting hanging above my head in my office. Each of the deans had fabulous Western paintings in their offices. We were scattered throughout the campus because we didn't have any room to put all these things. He came to me, he said, hey, why don't we build a museum? Well, I said, Chuck, I've never built a museum. Lord, I don't know how to build it. He said, well, you can learn, can't you? So he sent me around the country looking at museums, including the Museum of Western Art in Kerrville, Texas. It was one of the ones that I came to look at because these guys had been open about 20 years at that point. And I took notes about what to do and what not to do, talked to the directors, talked to people. And we went back to campus, and there on the campus of Navarro College, we built the Pierce Museums. The Pierce Museums are two museums under one umbrella. It's a rotunda with a great work of art, and then there is a hallway you go down to go to the Civil War side, and there's a hallway you go down to go into the Western art side. And so his two passions, he and Peg, his wife, their two passions are on display at Navarro College at the Pierce Museums, and that's been almost 30 years ago, I guess. So, here we are. And but Chuck and I worked together for all those years, 17 total years, and it began to be evident. He was in his 90s at that point. Began to be evident he was going to slow way down. The college had already hired a new librarian to take my place, and I was, kind of settling into, I guess I could, be here and manage it the rest of my life, when I got a call from the Briscoe Museum in San Antonio, and they wanted me to come down there and build a new museum for them. I'd already built one for the Pierces. And finding somebody with a skill set to build museums is kind of unique. It's a unique niche, if you will. So I went to San Antonio, built the Briscoe Museum, that's on the corner there of Market and Presses Street in downtown San Antonio. Was there for a couple of years. Left there and went to the C.M. Russell Museum in Great Falls, Montana. C.M. Russell being one of the great, Charlie Russell being one of the great Western artists of all times. And went up to the very barren and cold Montana winters and spent 3 years there. Left the C.M. Russell Museum and went to Hobbs, New Mexico, of all places, out in the middle of the oil patch. And the reason I went to the middle of the oil patch is I was tired of raising money. I'd been in 3 places where I had to raise millions and millions of dollars just to make the place operable. And Hobbs was offering me a chance to come and run a little community college there at New Mexico Junior College, community college children's library. And I didn't have to raise any money. All I had to do was basically ask oil companies for, the funding for programming. And we did. And 7 really wonderful years in Hobbs, New Mexico, when I decided I wanted to retire. And it was time to start talking about retirement. We still own a home in Corsicana, where Navarro College is. Our son lives there with our grandson, and my wife wanted to be closer, to the 2 of them. And so we decided, well, it's time to retire. We're going to leave New Mexico Junior College and Hobbs, New Mexico, and that's about the time I got a call from the people here at the Museum of Western Art. And they said, do you want to come? They were without a director here and looking for a director, and had been for a little while. And my reputation had been one of fixing things and bringing things back to their previous grandeur, if you will, or building new buildings. And so I said, sure, might as well. So they offered me housing here on campus. So I live on campus. My wife has a home. We have a home in Corsicana, and we split our time back and forth. She's here now, and I'll go up there in a couple of weeks, and we split our time seeing the kids. And but this is my kind of my retirement gig. But like I said, I was an accidental museum director, accidental art director. Shouldn't have ever done it. He was not trained in it. Everything's on the job training. Good background from East Texas State, because they offered big umbrella type degrees that would cover, the basis of a lot of these things. So I feel like I was prepared, but it was just, you couldn't have laid it out and said, this is what you're going to do. This is not your career path. You're going to wind up in Kerrville, Texas in, 2021, 2020 during a pandemic. I came here in April of 2019 on April Fool's Day. The irony is not lost on me.
Well, let's turn now to the Museum of Western Art. Could you tell us a little bit about its history and how it came into being?
Yeah, this building is also one of those almost accidental kind of museums, in that the Cowboy Artists of America, which is a group of 25 guys who paint and sculpt the American West, they're called the Cowboy Artists of America. They had already been in existence for about 15 years at that point, when a group of local businessmen here in Kerrville, L.D. Brinkman and Bobby Shelton, the Ronins, the Roden family, there's just a list of them on our walls out here of our number one benefit. They all got together and said, hey, why don't we build a museum for the Cowboy Artists of America and try to attract a new tourism group? We'll have the Cowboy Artists of America to supply all the art for the building, and we'll build a building and operate it, and it'll be a win-win situation. So they got together with the CA members, and they got together with fundraising and raised the money to build this magnificent facility that we're in. It was built by a guy named O'Neill Ford, who's a famous Texas architect with lots of big grandeur buildings in Austin, San Antonio, and the like. And O'Neill Ford is Ford, Powell, and Carson today. They're famous architects there in San Antonio, Austin. They got with O'Neill Ford and said, we want to build a new building. And the building he came up with was a hacienda-style mansion, if you will. From the outside, you look at it, and it's all low-slung, stucco, kind of hidden, and you think, well, it's not very impressive, Sitting up here gloriously on top of 10 acres, here in the hill country. And you walk in the big 10-foot double doors, and wow, there's some 20-foot ceilings with bovedas, which are the arched brickways, mesquite-cut wood floors, saltillo tile. It's just a glorious, wonderful building. And they built this building, and the CA moved into it. And for 20 years, from 1983, when it was first opened, to 2003, it operated exclusively for the benefit of the Cowboy Artists of America. But, the problem with that is that 20 guys, sometimes as few as 15 to 18 guys, it's hard for them to supply the number of art pieces that they need to keep a building like this active. Try to do the change-outs every 90 to 120 days to keep the museum fresh. These guys are also trying to make a living at the same time. They're artists that are working, and here they're having to supply art for the museum of, for the Cowboy Artists of America Museum. A lot of borrowed art was filtering and cycling through here, a lot of art from collectors. And after 20 years, it just became kind of unmanageable for one group to be the only group that supplied art for it. So in 2003, the decision was made to go from being the Cowboy Artists of America Museum to the Museum of Western Art. And that allowed us then to expand our mission, to bring in women, people of color, people from other nationalities, like some of the famous Chinese artists that paint and sculpt the American West that you don't ever think about. There are people in other countries that sculpt and paint the American West, and they don't even live here. But under the previous arrangement, they weren't members of the Cowboy Artists of America. We couldn't have their work, and so today we can. And it allows us to expand our mission so greatly. So it was a win-win for them, and it took the pressure off the members, the men of the CA. We still have a bulk of their collection, or a bulk of our collection is, by their members, and we still work hand in hand with them to get art supplied to us. They loan us works all the time. A lot of their members are in our permanent collection. So it's been a really win-win situation in the last 20 years that we've become the Museum of Western Art. But we operate a rotating schedule of art and exhibitions. We have an education program, and we have a world-class research library where we're sitting in now, and about 6,000 items that are associated with the American West. So we're a pretty much all-inclusive Western art museum. We feature almost exclusively art of the American West. Geographically, that'd probably be from the Mississippi River to to California, and from Mexico up to Canada. But we have some Mexican works occasionally, some Canadian works occasionally as they spill into the various regions. But we represent the American West, and that's what we do.
So what are some of the educational outreach that you and the museum engage in?
Well, first of all, we have a really big push towards children. A lot of the K through 12 education that we do. Our educator works with homeschool groups and the K through 12 crowd to bring them in to talk about art, to talk about, we do a lot of crafts days, art days, things that help the children get used to talking about the American West. It's about exposure, about what is the American West, to not let a lifestyle, if you will, die. One of our big education areas features a young girl going from St. Louis, Missouri, all the way to up the Oregon Trail, and the different trails that split across the country to avoid the mountains and go through the valleys. And, and we try to tell children what would it have been like to have been on the trail 100 years ago, and what would you have done in 130 years ago, give or take. What would you have done, in 1865 to, if you had a bad tooth? How do you eat? Well, you have to, shoot your food. You have to, they bought 100 pounds of potatoes and stretched them out over until they could get to the next city. How do you use the bathroom? It's just, the nation has changed, and kids today really don't always get that. They don't, to them, the internet's always been their life, right? But back in the early days of the American West, it was a much more rugged country. And it was a country where people had to survive. And you couldn't just go to, say, hey, Google, how far is it to Johnson City? You had to figure out how to get there and, go across trails and streams and, figure out how many days it was going to be and how you were going to feed your family. And sometimes they traveled in these, wagon trains for protection against the Native Americans. They traveled, against bandits and outlaws, and it was a much more involved process. So our education process is one of teaching them about the history of the American West and what it used to be like, so that they'll have an understanding of that. We also do adult programming for that non-K through 12 crowd, if you will. We do adult programming offering up to 8 workshops a year in the arts. We recently completed a workshop by the watercolorist Carol Arnold, pastelist. I'm sorry, I said watercolorist. Pastelist Carol Arnold, who's a local lady, where she taught her techniques. We completed a workshop with Jason Skull, who's our resident artist, and he took basically a wad of clay and said, "Here's how we do this. This is how to build an armature, how to put the arms and legs on a figure, how to put the legs on a horse and tail, and get people to unleash their creativity." So we do workshops throughout the year. We'll do 6 to 8 of those. We have a lot of adult events like Wild West Wine Wednesday, where we talk about art. The first Wednesday of every month, we come together. There'll be 50, 60 people. We come together and we talk about American art. We talk about the Western art. I'll do a lecture or bring in an artist, and we talk about art. And then we turn it over to a local vineyard or brewery or distillery to talk about their product. I don't kid myself. That's what people come for, is the free wine, and the free spirits. But we get together and have discussions about the West, and we educate people about local products, such as the local wineries. And so, with as many wineries as we have here in Kerr County, Gillespie County, that can last for a long, long time. The wineries love talking about their product, and we loved having them. So we do that sort of thing. We bring in guest speakers on a regular basis. So it's just kind of a constant with education. Trying to figure out what they might come to see, what they might come to hear, what lectures we have book signings, to bring people in to talk about their books. Usually Western subject matter, Texas subject matter. So, education is not just, the American West. It's what we feel like people will come see and enjoy, and, so we can be a big part of the educational part of. We work closely with Schreiner University. Schreiner has a camp every summer for kids from Houston. They apply to be in the camp, and they come and spend 1 month on Schreiner's campus, living in the dorms over there. And they work with 4 world-class Western artists. Jason Skull, our resident artist, is part of that process every year. A guy named Brandon Bailey, who's an artist out of Scottsbluff, Nebraska. Bill Cowick out of Houston, and Eric Slocum out of San Marcos. Those 4 gentlemen come onto campus. They did last year, and they will again this next year, and teach intensive education, techniques too. They spend 2 weeks working on paintings, and then they switch to sculpting, or they start with the sculpting and they switch back to the painting, and they spend 4 solid weeks living, working, breathing, eating, Western art. During that time, during that month long, they make multiple visits here to the museum, where we talk about management of an art career for those who might want to become artists. What does it take to start, becoming an artist in your own right? We'll talk about the art market. We'll go visit galleries here in Kerrville and in Fredericksburg. So a lot of busing of kids around the county to take them to see the arts and to be a part of the art world here. And Kerrville and Gillespie County, Kerr County, and Gillespie County have a tremendous, very vibrant arts community, as you're probably aware. Both musically, but then the flat arts and the sculpture arts, the fine arts, if you will. So we work with those kids, and there'll be 60 of those kids. And for a month, they live, eat, breathe, sleep, and we give them a lot of exposure to the Museum of Western Art. And when they leave here, we have on their last day, we have a big banquet here on the campus of the museum. And so their folks can come see their works, and we put the works up and talk about arts. They get to meet the instructors, the parents do, and our staff here at the museum. So, that's exciting. It's not just one thing, it's a myriad of things, and we're proud to be a part of the educational endeavors, here, both K through 12 and adults.
So let me turn now to the exhibits, and really introduce that by asking you, what What, in your opinion, makes the museum so unique within the realm of Western art or cowboy museums in the United States?
Well, I think probably first and foremost is that we've got a huge and wonderful core collection. We've got a core collection of great American Western art. We have a good core collection of the CA, the Cowboy Artists of America members. We have a good collection of people who've come since the museum became the Museum of Western Art. The core collection is really very, very special, and it includes the L.D. Brinkman collection. The L.D. Brinkman collection was the personal endeavor of L.D. Brinkman, and Mr. Brinkman was a major collector. He lived here in Kerrville, and his works were, very well gathered over, a 30-year period. And when he passed, his estate, his family, gifted to us the L.D. Brinkman collection. Now it's officially on loan from the L.D. Brinkman Foundation, but I'm certain it'll be a loan that'll last a very, very, very long time. So we have a great core collection. We have a great collection in the L.D. Brinkman materials. And on top of that, we borrow a lot of really great collections. We had recently the George Matthews collection. George and Betsy Matthews have homes in Florida here in Kerr County, and they've collected Western art for 30 some odd years, and we borrowed their materials to have on display. And we had a show called The West in Winter. And the West in Winter was all scenes that they have collected over the years of nothing but winter scenes in the American West. And so we were able to borrow their collection and have it on display. We're getting ready to, in April of this year, have 70 works from 10 different artists who are painting the skyscapes for us. And it's a show called The Heavens Declare. It's based on Psalm 19, the heavens will declare the glory of God. And it's people who are really traditionally overlooked in the Western art world because they do landscapes and skyscapes for the most part. They generally don't do horses, cows, Native Americans, cowboys, landscapes. And we're going to do 90 days of shows for April, May, and June, basically, of next year of nothing but skyscapes. So we're willing to, because we're a smaller organization, we're willing to take some chances, bring in some different exhibitions. I think that's the strength of what we do here, is that we're changing exhibitions every 90 to 120 days so that local people don't get bored. I don't want anybody to say, well, I've been to the museum in 5 or 6 years, but it never changes. Well, it changes every 100 days, And I want our visitors from Rhode Island, when they pass through on their way to California, I want them to be able to see great art no matter what's up, right? Whether it's part of our permanent collection or a borrowed collection like the Matthews collection, or a curated collection like the Heavens Declare, the skies. So we're constantly changing out those exhibitions. We have some, we have some favorites in the collection. We have things that, if we don't have them up, people, well, where's the such and such? It's kind of like the ruby slippers at the National Gallery. If you take them down, people are going to be mad. They want to see those certain paintings. They want to see the G. Harvey, for example, Mission Wells. They want to see No Place for a Gunsel, which is, a famous painting. They want to see those pieces, so a lot of times we have to drag some of the ones out that we're all kind of tired of. We've seen a lot of it, but we have to keep in mind our guests have not. So, we put out new things, fresh things. We have runs of 90 to 100 days where we have exhibitions like the Skyscapes, the Heavens Declare. Then we'll turn right around and do, a one-man show for somebody, like we did Robert Pummel, who's a local artist, nationally known, probably one of the great Western artists of our time, of any generation. He just lives 200 yards from the museum. We had a recent show for him of 75 works, and I had a one-man show for Robert Pummel, and was the envy of a lot of places, a lot of museums in the country, because they would love to do a one-man show. But for us, it was simple because the works were all really relatively easy to get here, right? I mean, we didn't have to pay huge shipping bills and worry about packing and, and crating paintings. A lot of them existed right here in Kerr County already. So gathering them up was I don't want to say easy, but it was certainly doable versus a museum and, well, let's just take the Russell Museum. To get anything to the Russell is going to take you a couple $100 per item. It's just shipping is a huge issue for remote museums. We're centrally located. We're close to Austin, San Antonio, Dallas, so things can get here. So that's an advantage for us. But a long answer for what do you think the strength of your collection is? It's a number of things. It's our permanent collection. It's our ability to borrow great works, and that's our pledge to the people, to our members. We're always going to have great works on the wall.
I hope you will join us for part 2 of my interview with Darrell Beauchamp, the Executive Director of the Western Museum of Art, which we'll post next week on the Hill Country Podcast. In this next podcast, we'll take up the educational outreach of the museum and where the museum may be headed down the future in terms of its exhibits and plans. I know you will enjoy part 2 as much as you enjoyed part 1. Thanks so much for joining me. We're going to link to the Western Museum of Art site in our show notes, so I hope you'll check it out, and I hope you'll consider joining as a member. If you are a resident of the Hill Country and you have a story to tell and you'd like to do so, please give me a shout. I'd love to talk to you about coming onto the Hill Country Podcast. You can reach me at tfox@tfoxlaw.com. Thanks so much for listening.